So the inaugural episode of the Philosophy Pod with Luke and Brian.
Yeah, starting on chapter 2B, not chapter 1 or
Here we
2A.
go. Well, I was actually thinking, do you feel comfortable covering just those first two chapters so we could start with 1 and then do 2A? Do you feel like you remember enough of 1?
Honestly, I don't think I do. Let me go back and see it a little bit. Because I remember when we did that first meeting, I remember, so we wrote this other book, To Sickness Unto Death. And I noticed there was a lot of overlap in those two, where the sickness unto death talks a lot about, what is it? I mean, it talks a lot about the self and some of these concepts he's invoking in the first one of, the temporal and the eternal. Like, I know those play a big role, like right off the bat in the sickness unto death.
Yes.
And so in the first one, I remember we were going through and trying to sort of tease out what these concepts could mean, because he just assumes you understand them here, and like he doesn't mean by eternal anything like anyone else's means. Like he's got this whole ontological and metaphysical backdrop behind it, and like I don't really understand it myself, but I do remember in that first one I brought my version of A Sickness Unto Death, and we were just sort of comparing passages, trying to figure out sort of what's happening in the background in this chapter, because he kind of just like assumes much more of his work than you could if this is your first reading by him. So
well,
we went
how about
over
this?
that.
Let me propose this, Brian.
Okay.
Because this week I've been reading through the first 2 chapters, so I've got a few notes in the margins. What if I hit the high points for myself? And I'm sure that'll spark some insights from you.
Yeah, all right. Yeah,
and then we can kind of work through chapter 1 that way. I haven't had as much time on 2A, so you'll probably have more to talk about there. But does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Is there anything, just as an introduction to Kierkegaard, that's worth talking about before we get into works of love?
Yeah, so I guess do you remember last time we spoke, we were talking about how he's arguing that love is a duty.
Yep.
And the you shall. And then I brought up the Karsa's book, Infinite and Finite Games, and how one of the one of the central premises of the whole book is like, if you must play, you can't play. And so the question I had on my mind was, well, if love is a duty, then you must love. But if like love is anything like play, then if you must do it, you can't do it. So the question I sort of had lingering in my mind after probably the first reading or two of 2A is, how could one love if one must love? Like if it's a duty and you must do it, but if you must do it, you can't do it, then how do you do it? Like what even is it to love if you know what I mean? If you're bound by necessity to do it, but it's not free choice if it's that way, then you're not doing it. If you must play, you can't play. If you must love, you can't love. Like how do you work around that? Like to me, it sounds like a bit of a paradox. And so I remember that was the big question on my mind at the end of 2A the first time. And I do know he does actually talk about that a little bit here. You know what? So before I get ahead of myself, something going into Kierkegaard you should know is he is a fan of paradox. So he's following Hegel, and Hegel is just one inconsistency, contradiction, paradox, these two things. Like he's just all over the place like that. And Kierkegaard, though rejecting everything about Hegel, is also a big fan of paradox. Okay. And so I think that question that I had coming out of 2A, if one must love, one can't love, then how could you possibly do it, is almost like the point. Like he wants that paradox there. So he tells you, hey, there's something weird going on here, and then just moves on. Just doesn't even discuss it further. It's just like, yep, this is ridiculous, but God's will, let's get it. He just continues on. So I'd say look for anywhere you see a paradox, and then if he isn't discussing it, it's because it's there on purpose. Okay. It's not like an accident. It's not a flaw in his reasoning or his logic or his thinking. He's aware that it's there. He put it there on purpose, and it's supposed to sort of be provocative. Okay. And would Kierkegaard be considered an existentialist? I mean, I think looking back, people call him one, but like, no, that didn't even exist for him in the
Okay.
1850s, 60s.
What would he describe his own philosophical tradition then?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, no, he's very unabashedly Christian, but I
Right.
don't think he would, or like, I don't think I've ever seen it or heard it called like he's a Christian philosopher.
Right.
So he's like, there's no doubt about it. I mean, he's quoting the Bible as the opening passage of every chapter in this book. It's like there's no
Right.
secret there. So I'm not sure like where he would have called himself, but I know he's rejecting Hegel. Like I know that for sure. I think he refers to Hegel or he refers to Hegel's philosophy as the system, and he thinks like
Okay.
it. Yeah, if your philosophy covers absolutely everything and leaves nothing to chance or nothing, no mystery, nothing to wonder about, then it's like worthless. What the hell are you supposed to do with it? Every question is
And
answered. There's nothing to wonder. There's nothing to sort of provoke thought. And what the hell do
yes.
you do with it? You put it
Yes.
down, you like go back to your miserable life. Like that's no.
Yeah, and thus Kierkegaard's attraction to the paradox.
Yeah.
And I can see someone who is compelled to investigate paradox would be
Yep.
unsatisfied with like a
Yeah, with a system that answers every possible question and straightens out every possible problem.
exactly.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So
That's
I know, and I think that's part of why he ends up being sort of in hindsight put or like grouped or understood as an existentialist. I think is because he's saying it's something like he's very much concerned with the individual, with individual integrity, with maximizing individual potential. It's sort of like finding a silver lining in suffering. Like he's got a lot of these themes in his writing, and these are themes that are you find in Nietzsche. These are themes you find in the proper existentialists. So I think that's why he gets sort of put there as a grandfather, a father, a founder, an early thinker, whatever phrase you want to use. But I don't know what he himself, like where he saw himself in the history of philosophy.
Yeah. But he was also inspired by Socrates,
Yeah.
wasn't he?
Yeah.
Would you say he was in the Platonic tradition? Like would you go that far or just
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know enough about his thinking to say. I mean, I know in I think when you get this wrong, I think it's either or, another book I've never read. So see what I have to say about it, I guess. But I'm pretty sure it's an either or. He does a lot of like Socratic dialoguing, Socratic irony, Socratic sort of perspective taking and perspective demolishing.
Yeah, that aporia. I could see how he loves that
Yeah,
sense of the
just
shock.
to run you into a wall and then leave you there.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something in there. I mean, when you read it too, he's constantly asking rhetorical questions that he himself isn't exactly answering. He's just throwing like food for thought out there and letting you go. Like, good luck, guys. I know I've got a very complex and in-depth body of work, but just start here and be confused.
Yeah.
You'll get there.
Oh yeah, I've started Fear and Trembling. I've got a decent way through it, and that feels very much in the line of just the pondering. Taking a story that doesn't quite make sense on surface value and just exploring it, and never, at least as far as I have gotten, like not coming to a conclusion.
Yeah.
Just unraveling kind of the layers of complexity. And it's more mystery, it's like deeper mystery and mystery.
Yeah, it's like you're just continuously falling through it.
Yeah.
There must be a bottom somewhere, but you're always just falling, never landing, like not sure what's going on. There's something I'm missing. It's like, how many times can you read the book before it's like, I don't know what I'm missing anymore. I know I didn't get very far through that. I started it, and then after I read like 10 different versions of the Abraham story.
Yeah.
Like, exactly. I don't even understand what's happening anymore. You broke me. I don't see any coherent thread, beginning or ending. Like, I don't know what's happening. It's the same story just told over and over again.
Yeah, I haven't. Ways. Yeah, I didn't progress past that, but still.
Yeah, I didn't even get to the end of that. I think I was on an airplane too. I had found like Amazon Kindle like special deals, like 99 cents for like 8 different works by Kierkegaard. It's like, you know what? I got a 6-hour flight ahead of me. I'm like, I'll buy this and I'll read some philosophy. And that's where I started because it was the only title I knew. And that was the first and last time I read Kierkegaard for like 3 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I was like, just never mind. I don't know what the hell this guy's talking about.
Yeah. All right. Well, you want to get into it?
Yeah, I mean, let's see what we can figure out.
Yeah, exactly.
Go away.
Well, I just think the opening was beautiful in terms of, him pointing out like the self-deceit of the shrewd,
Yeah.
proud of not being deceived, thinks that one should believe nothing which he cannot see by means of his physical eye. Then first and foremost, one ought to give up believing in love. And to me, that really strikes the tone. I mean, definitely for this first chapter, but, pointing out the fact that love eludes that kind of cold investigation, as he talks about, it's like investigating the source of a spring. The deeper you plunge into the spring to find its source, like the farther it feels like it's from you, the more it eludes you.
Right.
And I think that's very much on theme to what we're talking about. And it almost gives me the impression of understanding love indirectly. It's not by a direct investigation of love. As he says, one knows a tree by its fruits.
Yeah.
There's a way in which he's wanting to investigate this thing, but this thing cannot be investigated by directly observing. It's like the sun. You can't directly look at the sun. You'll be blinded by the sun. You see by means of the sun. If you try to look directly at the source of the light, you'll go blind. And in some ways, this investigation into love is a similar pursuit, which I just find, it's something that I've been just kind of sitting with.
Yeah. No, this was actually that opening quote, or like the title, "Love is known by its fruits," or that, I guess that's not the title. What is the title? "Love's hidden life and its recognizability by its fruit. Fruit is known." Yeah, so the tree is known by its own fruit. That stuck with me. Like, that alone kind of stuck with me a lot, because like the first sort of intuition I had in reading it as to what that means was like a consequentialist sort of interpretation. Like, the tree is known by its fruit, as in like the value is known by its consequence, whether it's good or
Right.
bad. But I don't think that's what I don't think the concept that fruit is trying to sort of metaphorically capture is the same as like consequences. Like, if you were a consequentialist, like, is this action good or bad, or what were the consequences?
Yeah.
Did it produce pleasure for somebody or pain for somebody? How many somebodies, across how much time? Like, my first reading was a consequentialist kind of reading, that like you could judge the tree only after you know the consequences of its sort of existence. And I don't think that's actually right. I don't think that the whatever fruit, because it's obviously kind of a metaphor, the tree is known by its fruit. But whatever it's trying to like get at, that metaphor, I don't think it's consequences at all. It was almost something more like it always was what it is, and it's only your knowledge that was sort of falling behind, and like your knowledge of it catches up when you know what the fruit it is. But it's not like you have to wait for the fruit for the tree to be the tree it is. It's not an apple tree only after it's grown apples. It was an apple tree when it was a seed. Like, it was always an apple tree. And so it's not so much that you know it by the consequences of its existence, but you know it by the like fulfillment of its potential. And so when it's like love's hidden life and its recognizability, it's like you know an action is the product of love, like the fruit is the product of the tree, not by the consequences of the so-called loving action, but like you see that it always was a loving action. Like, it never became that afterwards. It always was something like that. I don't know. I'm
Absolutely.
kind of
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, on page 26, I have this section underlined. This is the beginning of this second paragraph. on that page. Yet when one says that love is recognized by its fruits, one also says thereby that love itself is, in a certain sense, in hiding, and therefore can be known only by its revealing fruits. So there's a sense in which, okay, and then he says, the life of a plant is hidden, the fruit is the manifestation. So the thing is revealed by its fruits, but the thing has existence independent of the fruit.
Right.
Which I think is exactly what you were saying. Which is in opposition to a consequentialist reading. But he's pointing to a thing that is hidden and can only be known indirectly. I feel like that's the nature of love that he's exploring, which to me it rings true, but it is kind of, it's a mysterious thing. I feel like he's really getting at something here. It's almost like like you were saying, it's like the potential of a plant is hidden in the seed. The potential is there in the seed, whether or not that seed becomes, let's just say it's a mustard seed. Whether or not that mustard seed becomes a mustard plant and blooms, it still has the potential.
Right.
It is hidden in the seed to some degree. One may never see the fruit of that potential, but the potential is still there. I don't know if
sense. And then I don't know, I guess one of the things that I'm always sort of not really hung up on, but like I never know where to go next, like thought wise, is if it never fulfills its potential as the seed it is, then even though it always was the mustard seed, a mustard tree, mustard plant, I don't even know, are mustard trees, or are they just like bushes?
They're
I have
just like
no
bushes.
idea what that plant is. But all right, the mustard plant. Like if you never knew it was, but it always was. Hang on, let me try to rephrase that. That was a stupid way to phrase that sentence. Yeah, if it never fulfills its potential, then you would never know what it always already was. And that to me sounds almost like problematic. Like that's somehow not right. Like it would be better if they all could be known in virtue of having fulfilled their potential. And like the idea of failure to fulfill potential and thereby never be known as what you are or what it is, whether it be an act of love, a work of love, a mustard seed, whatever, a water bottle, like it just seems like that's problematic. Like that should be a problem we're trying to solve, is the failure of things to reveal their being through the fulfillment of their potential. And I think somehow like the work of love, the Christian concept of agape, like these things, like to me, they're somehow tied together. That you could be a factory worker and all you do is pull one lever to press one piece of steel into one shaped cap. And you don't even know if that cap's going to go on a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi. It's just like a little steel cap. Like failure to do that job well prevents that little piece of steel from fulfilling its potential and thereby being known. And it's almost like robbing existence of being that should be there. And like it seems like a small problem that quickly can escalate into much bigger problems if you're not, or if a person isn't sort of, I don't know, appropriately tuned to the good, I guess, to just bring it to a very platonic place. So I don't know, that's something I'm always sort of hung up on with that notion there of like, even if the mustard seed doesn't become the mustard plant, it sounds like it's a little minor tragedy, like a tiny tragedy.
Yes, yeah,
It's not in Shakespearean proportions, but like a little tragedy, like that sucks. It would be better if it did. And the fact that it wasn't, to me, seems sorrowful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, one thing I was thinking about, to me, it feels analogous, but more closely related to the topic of love is, I mean, let's say an infant who dies, did that infant have love in his heart? That human was not able to bear fruit of love.
Right.
All that human individual was doing was, crying for its food, let's say. Was there love in that baby's heart? Even in like a infantile, like a seed form,
Mhm.
would one ever know?
Yeah, I guess how could you?
But I don't think it's appropriate to, you couldn't say that baby did not have love in its heart. One couldn't say that.
Yeah, I guess you couldn't really make either claim with any support. I mean, you could
Yes.
try, but like at the end, it would just be a sentence you uttered.
Yes. Yes. If that baby grows to be 35 and is, say, a repeat child molester,
Right.
you could make
Right.
some kind of moral judgment.
Yeah.
Or if they, were on their way to becoming a canonized saint, you could make another judgment. But to me, that kind of speaks to this idea of a thing being present without witnessing the fruit of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Being
I think he's
present
pointing at something.
without witnessing the fruit. Yeah, he probably is. Like he's way too talented a writer and like thorough a thinker to not be pointing at something with everything he writes.
Yes, yes. Okay, so let's be sure to talk about the temporal versus eternal,
Yeah, honestly, I
because
don't
I
think we
know.
got anywhere with it. Like I still don't really understand what he means.
Okay, okay. Well, I mean, here was a passage that I had underlined. I mean, this is just on page 24. Um, but a phrase, the eternal does not let itself be mocked. And then further down, but just because love is the bond of the eternal, and just because the temporal and the eternal are heterogeneous, to the earthly prudence of temporality, love may seem to be a burden, and therefore in the temporal world it may seem a great relief to the sensualist to cast this bond of eternity away. So it seems like he's definitely setting up this a tension between the eternal and the temporal. Something could
Mhm.
be a burden on the temporal, but could be kind of a gift at the same time, a gift in the eternal dimension. I don't know. Does that kind of open up a point of discussion you guys were having?
I mean, it's definitely sort of adjacent. I don't remember. I honestly don't remember the discussion very well. It took a lot of sort of sidebars.
Yeah.
One point, me and Trevor were arguing that Socrates is valuable. Like reading Plato's philosophy is a good thing. You should read more of it. And so, like, there was a huge sort of
Trevor was arguing against, you were
yeah,
arguing for.
yeah, no, exactly. Because there's a passage in the Sickness Unto Death. I don't have it with me. It's still sort of packed up. But I know he gives like this whole elaborate metaphor of someone who owns a large, beautiful, well decorated, sunlit sort of mansion, but locks themselves in the basement and never goes upstairs. And then I was trying to make the case that the Kierkegaard's metaphor of this big, beautiful mansion in which someone lives in the dark, musty basement is like another rendition of the metaphor of the cave.
Ah.
And like
Uh-huh.
I was trying to sort of make that point and sort of come to Kierkegaard through a sort of I guess Platonic metaphysics of some sort to try to make sense of the temporal versus the eternal. And I'm not sure we ever got anywhere because I'm pretty sure me and Trevor just argued over Plato. So I'm not sure it was very productive discussion. But I do know we sat with this for like the whole time. I don't think we ever even got past it.
Okay.
But I think it's because me and Trevor just digressed into, why is Plato valuable?
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I would have been on your side in that argument.
Nice.
Brian.
Oh, I wish you had been there because I think I might have lost it.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we could just kind of put a pin in that. Yeah, some other beautiful prose from Kierkegaard is, there's a flower called the flower of eternity, but there's also remarkably a so-called everlasting flower, which, like perishable flowers, blooms only at a certain time of the year. What a mistake to call the latter a flower of eternity. So,
Yeah, bro, there are so many like just well well described analogies in everything. Like he's
oh
so
my
good
God,
at writing. He's so
he's
creative.
yeah, yes, yes. He'll be like, here's a concept and then 3 analogies.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, but anyway, so I think it's getting at the eternal is that which abides, which I think to me, in some sense, puts Kierkegaard in a Platonic tradition, because he's really getting at these, like, almost, Platonic forms, ontological realities. Love for him, he's placing it in the eternal, which he says Christian love abides. So it has this eternal nature to it, which to me it really, it feels like we're starting to get into the realm of the forms or something like that. I don't know. Do you have that sense?
Square, go lay down. Yeah, I do have that sense, but I'm not sure that the Platonic realm of the forms would so readily sort of correspond to the eternal. It seems like they should, and it seems like they do, and I'm just not sure how, because Kierkegaard, I don't know, maybe I just haven't read enough of him or the right works, but it seems like he is using terms that have technical definitions, technical meanings that are explored elsewhere, but not giving you any of it. He's just invoking these concepts.
Right.
And so, I do get that sense. I get a very sort of Platonic metaphysics from him, but I'm never sure that if what he means by the eternal is the same thing as what Plato means by, the eternal. If he's saying like the forms are eternal, that they're changeless and timeless, and
right,
they can't be affected in any way. They are what they are, permanently and forever, unchanging and ceaseless. I'm just not sure, though. It seems like there's obvious overlap. But it is something I sort of always have in the back of my mind, and it's part of why I wanted to read this book, because he does have a sort of robust ontology like Plato, and I know there's Platonic influence in there, or at the very least Socratic influence. I mean, maybe he rejects everything about Plato, but he likes Socrates' irony and manner of discussion. So, but there's obvious influence there, and so I always have it in the back of my mind, like how much of a Platonic metaphysics is sort of capable of shedding light on Kierkegaard's metaphysics, or are they like a good contrast? Like does one reveal the other, or does one sort of contrast against the other such that it could be understood? And I'm just never sure which is the better way to hold sort of Plato and Kierkegaard together.
To me, I get the sense that Kierkegaard is approaching these Platonic forms from more of a distance and more of a place of unknowing, especially love.
Yeah.
He's pointing at something. I feel like he's much more reticent than Plato is to describe what this thing is. He's it's not necessarily like a, what is it, like a negative theology, like a cataphatic, but there's something about it where I feel like he gets glimmers of the nature of, let's say, love as, an eternal, let's just say, form. But I just see him not quite willing to go into much detail to describe what this thing is. It's like he's talking about it in the first chapter, which is the more you investigate, the farther it withdraws from you.
Right.
And one, he ends this first chapter by saying, only he who abides in love can recognize love. And in the same way, his love is to be known. So there's a way in which one has to just abide in the thing to recognize it. It feels like a very different approach than Plato. Much, much more willing to describe, say, like the geometrical properties of the forms and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Kierkegaard's definitely pulling from a very different place. Maybe that's like the thing that sort of always holds me back from just assuming a lot of Platonic metaphysics at work here, because Plato, like, there is very much a geometric sense to the forms, that they like the perfect analogy to understand the forms is understanding geometry. And for him, I mean, he throws one metaphor, one analogy, one parable. He's just throwing these things at you one after another.
Oh,
He's never like not no one of them seems to be the central analogy where if you understand this, then it maps to that. Where for
exactly.
Plato, it's like it's geometry. If you understand geometry, then you've got the perfect analogy for understanding
Ex-
forms. And I don't know what that perfect analogy is for Kierkegaard, so I don't know what the hell he's talking about when he invokes the eternal. And so I don't know how Platonic it is. He's just
uh-huh.
giving you metaphors over and over again.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. It's almost like for Kierkegaard to describe, say, like the perfect circle, he would
Mm-hmm.
say, look at this flower, look at this ball, look at this
Yeah,
wheel. You know what I mean? Like
yeah. Like that thing
he
Socrates saying,
would
"No, I
point.
didn't want examples. I wanted this other thing." Kierkegaard's like, "Well, you're gonna get examples."
Yeah. And and Plato would just say, pi r squared.
Yeah,
There's the circumference,
yep. That is the
or
form.
two
That
pi r.
is
Sorry,
what it
two pi
is.
r. But yeah. I think it's a very it's a different approach. But I feel like he's pointing to
Hmm.
that which I feel like Plato tries to describe.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like I get the sense that between the two of them, they don't so much disagree on the conclusions they come to. They just take a different paths there.
Yeah. Hmm.
So it's almost like it's like they agree in concept and disagree in detail. If
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Totally. And I sense in Kierkegaard more of a reverence, almost a feeling of this idea of like you know taking off your shoes, you're standing on holy ground, carefully approaching
Hmm.
the holy, carefully approaching the eternal. I feel like with Kierkegaard, there's a certain amount of care involved,
Yeah.
and I mean it's like he's just in some ways he's holding back from fully describing what is experienced. I think it's a sense of the sacred, honestly. That's what I get from him. Like especially
Yeah.
when he's describing love. This is a sacred thing that he's trying to describe. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. No, and you definitely get that sense too, because he uses a lot of different. So when he's trying to talk about sort of like a true love, the true meaning of the word love, like the real thing, he really just calls it like not. He doesn't have that many different words for it. But when he's talking about like false forms of love, I mean, there's erotic love is a big one, and then there's sentimental this, and maybe it's not sentimental, but like he's got a handful of different words he uses to point to love that is not the that which binds the eternal to the temporal, like the other loves, the ones we just throw around willy-nilly. He doesn't have like one standard word to refer to that kind of love. He's just sort of self-love and erotic love and this love and that love, but none of them are the true love, which is that binds the eternal and the temporal. One is ontologically significant, and the other is it's a passing whim. You feel it now, you
mhm.
don't later. It comes back, it fades, it's strong, it's weak, but it's not binding the eternal to the temporal, whatever the hell that means.
It's a flower which blooms one day, is gone the
Yeah,
next. It's not the eternal flower of
yeah.
love.
Like, here's another one, sensitive love. So like there's a bunch, and then there's eternal love, true love.
Yeah. And in that sense it does feel very Platonic, or maybe even like kind of Neoplatonic in terms of like an emergence.
Mhm.
You have eternal love, from eternal love uh kind of spill forth these different temporal forms, or just different temporal versions, manifestations, expressions, which point to the eternal, but they're not the eternal. And the
Right.
mistake is the big mistake is kind of hanging hanging eternity on, one of these temporal loves, like on erotic love,
Right.
to try to grasp eternity in that is the great mistake.
And I guess that sort of brings us back to if it has to sort of transform from that sort of lesser form of love, the uneternal, the non-eternal, the sensate love, the sensitive love, the erotic love, the love of the poets, poetic love, self-love. If that has to be transformed into, true love, love which binds the eternal to the temporal, and the transformation is in sort of like recognition that love is a duty, not a choice. And how could you make that transition by choice? Because I think that's the other part of it. It has to be a choice. You have to choose to love. You have to choose to bind yourself to the duty to love in order to sort of make love the duty it is, or to treat it with the respect it rightfully deserves. But if they're sort of like categorically different, or different in kind and different in type, then it seems like you couldn't really transform one into the other. It would, like, you'd have to come to it by different means. That you could never take poetic love and turn it into a duty. It either always was or never was. It's known, the tree is what the tree was, regardless of whether it bore fruit. So I guess the question I would pose to the text in continuing to read is, do you transform poetic love into eternal love, or they're just different in type, they're different in kind entirely? That if all you have is poetic love in every aspect of your life, then you don't just transform one of them, you just have to eradicate it from your day and, I guess, replace it.
To me, it's more of a,
or like, how would you integrate the love which is a duty into your life if you're not already sort of bound by duty to love? Like, if you're not already bound to do that, how do you integrate it into your life? Where does it come from?
yeah, I see two different issues at work here.
Okay.
So one is this question of the duty.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is something of, like, how does the temporal relate to the eternal?
Yeah.
Are those two things connected, or are those separate issues for you?
See, I think they're connected. I mean, they're definitely connected for me. So I don't know, maybe I'm confused about the way they're connected, and that's why I'm lost. But for me, they're definitely connected, because if that which binds the eternal to the temporal is love, and love is a duty, if you are not already bound to that duty, then somehow, I suppose, you are disconnected from the eternal. And to reestablish that connection would be to integrate duty bound love into your life. But if you haven't already done that, and you're already disconnected from the eternal because you've subscribed to poetic love and tried to, I think, would you say, hang the hat of something from it, or like hang eternity, yeah, from the temporal? Like, if you're already one of those people trying to hang eternity from the temporal, I guess, how would you go about undoing that error and correcting it?
Yeah, so this is just the impression I get from Kierkegaard, is that, let's say, poetic love is in some sense a reflection, kind of a temporal manifestation of eternal love. So there is a relationship. So poetic love does somehow get its source from eternal love, but it is simply, like, it's a temporal manifestation of that. It fades, which is why, as he says, that's why the poets, love to sing about this
Right.
temporal love, because it's a flower that fades. It's temporal. It's tragic.
Right. Sort of by singing about it, you revivify it, even if for only a moment.
Yes.
You can sort of recapture it in some sense.
So it's bittersweet in that way. but it gets its sweetness from the eternal. I think that's what Kierkegaard would say. Like it has the taste of sweetness because of eternal love.
Okay, so if you've got the taste for love in any capacity, eternal, poetic, erotic, self, whatever it is, if you've gotten the taste for love, then you could sort of in principle follow that.
Yes.
Okay, so it almost seems like I just got the sort of intuition then that love might be doing for Kierkegaard the work beauty does for Plato in the Symposium, where beauty is like you need to get a taste for it in childhood. And that's why Plato makes such a big deal about educating children in poetry and music in the Republic, like right off the bat. Don't even worry about math yet. Get a taste for what good poetry is, for what good music is. Like get that taste for the beautiful and then follow it forever. And so from sort of what you just said, it gave me the sense that love for Kierkegaard is doing the work philosophically that beauty does for Plato. That get a taste for it. There is no sort of wrong way to get a taste for love. If you get it, from the poets singing about fated love and temporal love, it's only a bad thing if you sort of take that to be the highest form, the end all be all. But if you allow yourself to get a taste for it and then follow that taste, that it will lead you to the eternal and then properly bind and balance the eternal and the temporal.
Yes, I mean that's the impression I get. I feel like he doesn't go out and say that, but
no, he definitely doesn't.
I don't know. That is definitely me reading between the lines.
Yeah,
because I think that because I mean, for example, just talking about duty and eternity.
Mm-hmm.
So on page 47, the last paragraph, he says, consequently, only when it is a duty to love, only then is love eternally secure. The security of the eternal casts out all anxiety and makes the love perfect, perfectly secure. So for me, that points to the fact that so duty for him is related to security and the eternal.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel like that's one of his biggest critiques of these other forms of love is the temporality. So
right.
I don't see, honestly, I don't see a lot of critique in terms of the love itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's more the manifestation of that is temporal. And if you're looking for eternal love, I mean, he is saying that can only exist in the context of a duty and the security of a duty.
So it only manifests in the context of a duty. So then it would have to be something that was always present. Like it never faded. It doesn't come in degrees. It's not that, right now I'm in a good mood and so I'm feeling especially loving in an eternal way. But like later when, my dog shits in his crate for the 4th time in 10 hours, maybe I'm not in such a loving mood anymore.
Right.
That the fact that it's coming and going, it can never be sort of ended, those cycles of intensity and pacification and intensity and diminishment is probably a better word. But like to get rid of those fluctuations, it has to be bound by duty.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing what I was thinking about when you were talking is the concept of the neighbor. Does he get into that in these first 2 chapters? I can't remember where it's introduced.
Yeah, definitely in 2A.
Yeah, okay. And I think part of that, the concept of the neighbor, I think the way I've understood it is in contrast with the stranger. And so if your duty is to love the neighbor, it's to sort of treat everyone regardless of sort of the role they play in your life, whether they're a participant in sort of what you've got going on or if they're just a passerby, that there are no strangers. There is no one that you don't know. You to some sense or in some sense and to some degree know everybody, and they're more like your neighbor. They're someone with whom you share I guess some slice of time and space. Like you share something with them, and so they're not strangers properly speaking. They're neighbors. They're a part of, your day, your moment, your life, your shopping experience. Like they're a part of it in some sense, and they can play that role as a part well or poorly. But that's not really your responsibility to be concerned with. You just have to be concerned with how you play your part as a neighbor in the lives of your neighbors. Again, not strangers. You're not a stranger to anyone. You're a neighbor to everyone, and everyone should be properly understood as a neighbor to you. And so if you're bound by duty to love your neighbor, and I guess this is something he actually brings up himself later on, is that you will never exhaust opportunities to, participate in a work of love. If you're bound to love the neighbor and everyone is your neighbor, you literally can't, you can't go anywhere, do anything without falling through just how many dozens of opportunities to participate in love every day. And so they're really like, what room is there for fluctuation? It's just omnipresent. It never goes anywhere. There's always an opportunity in every moment. And so if you're bound by duty, then in every single moment, you have a duty to participate in love in that moment in whatever way that moment demands.
Yes.
So I guess that would be sort of an eternal temporal distinction. It never fades. It never goes away. You're never without an opportunity. The opportunities are everywhere always, even if you're alone.
Yes, and that makes me think of him describing love as both emanating from the heart, but love building the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that part? So
yeah, vaguely. I got it. It's almost like it's built by what it does, and
yes.
so it's not built by material or things or products. It's built by what it does, and so the more loving works it does, the better the heart's built. Again, though, like the heart is again a metaphor. He's not talking about that beating organ in your chest, and it almost like excites me and bothers me because I have like this intuitive sense while reading that I understand until I put the book down, and then it's all gone. It makes no sense anymore. So it's exciting and frustrating. All these damn metaphors, analogies, symbols. Jesus.
Yes, but what I feel like Kierkegaard is wrestling with is how does a fickle, finite, mutable human being start to practice eternal love or move towards that practice of eternal love, growing the heart by growing the heart of love, which enables one to love even more. And in a lot of ways, I think it is these are practices that in some ways, counteract our tendency to love someone one day and hate them the next, be infatuated with someone, and then move on to another infatuation the next week. I mean, this is human nature, and so I think, to me, this idea of being bound to duty is, in some sense, tying oneself to. I mean, I just get an image of like a post or something solid, something planted. One chooses to tie oneself to that so one does not stray. I mean, that to me, that's a duty. It's just remaining in one place. And then so there's that. It's kind of the abiding, choosing to abide out of duty. And then this idea, like you were saying, of loving one's neighbor as oneself, so that love is not simply pointed inward, but love is something that kind of the inward and the outward become one, where the love emanates, where there's not this kind of difference between loving oneself, loving one's neighbor, but one loves one's neighbor as oneself. And so the act of love, it simply emanates. I mean, that's the idea I get. And there's not like you were saying, not a judgment or a discernment between, is this someone I should love? Is this someone I don't have to love? It is
Mhm.
simply the neighbor as, a person one is close to, one is in proximity to. So that's where I get a sense of him. It's almost like he's describing the technique for one abiding in love, right?
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so he's not giving you any sort of procedure. It's not an instruction manual on how to integrate neighborly love into your life and day. It's almost like he's using like these different metaphors which are drawing attention to different relationships between entities as a is like an implicit demonstration of what it looks like. Like the
Yeah.
the tree is known by its fruit. Like recognizes like, I think, is in there somewhere, that
Mm-hmm.
he who lives in love recognizes one who lives in love, but one who is ignorant of love can't recognize one way or the other. So there was like a like knows like sort of theme in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if the so he brings attention in 2A, I think, right off the bat to the presumption in the statement of thy shall love, or thou shall love, or you shall love, however it's translated, that the presumption of human nature built into that is that everyone loves themselves first,
Right.
and then there so that's sort of like the default of human nature is self-love. And I wonder if the default of human nature is self-love, then any act of neighborly love has to be a choice, because you have to choose to act against what's default. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So then I'm wondering if that same pattern holds with respect to duty. So if the default is that you are bound to the duty of love, then every act contrary to neighborly love is a choice. And if you simply acted according to your nature, default act would be to love thy neighbor. And so I wonder if I wonder if there's like, in his view, if default for a human is to, I guess default would be self-love then, because if the presumption is that everyone loves themselves first, and then the goal is to love others like you love yourself, then I guess the presumption would be default is you're not bound to duty, and you have to choose to be in accordance with it. Because if you don't make the choice to be in accordance with it, you will default back to standard human nature, which is self-love. And so it's not the case that every act of self-love is the choice that is going against the nature to love the neighbor. But he's got a pretty bleak understanding of human nature, I'm starting to think. Like default
I
behaviors, we kind of suck, and we have to make all of
well,
these like duty bound choices not to suck. Otherwise, you will just default back to sucking.
it's just pretty realistic. I mean,
Yeah,
he even says we don't even love ourselves perfectly.
yeah,
Which,
yeah. No,
which it's just, I mean, to me, that strikes me as just true on face value. I mean,
yeah.
do I love myself well when I, choose to drink too much one night? Uh, or, choose to stay up late, wasting time. I mean, it's like, yeah, I don't love myself
Right,
perfectly,
properly. It's like it's
properly.
not that you weren't loving yourself; it's you weren't doing it properly.
Yes, yes. Or maybe choosing to love a certain nature, I don't know, prioritizing a certain desire, certain base nature over, the
Mhm.
higher good or something. So yeah, I mean, I think he makes a very strong point. We don't even know how to love ourselves perfectly. So we even have to learn that. And in addition to learning to love ourselves well, we have to learn to love our neighbor well. And the only way to do that, I mean, to me, this argument just makes sense. The only way to do that is through a sense of a duty and obligation, something that will pull us back to that position, because just for whatever reason, our default nature is not to abide in love.
Right. Okay. Okay. And then if you take that the emanation idea too, then learning to love yourself properly is learning to love the neighbor properly. You love the neighbor like yourself.
Yes, exactly.
So if you've properly participated in neighborly love toward the neighbor, then it could only be because you're participating in proper self-love, that the two are mutually reinforcing. To fail in one is to fail in the other to some degree, or to hold yourself back in one is to be held back in the other.
Yes. I honestly, and that bit about, loving thy neighbor as thyself, I honestly didn't fully get what he was pointing at until, reading it over the past few days.
Yeah.
But this idea of thy neighbor as thyself, it's like the phrasing, it sandwiches those two together, where those two modes of loving become one. And so, I mean, like you're saying, it just becomes loving.
Right, just
loving.
Loving.
Yes. Abiding in love is, loving one's neighbor and loving oneself. You can't separate the two. And as he says, a tree is called to bear good fruit. A tree is not called to judge the fruit of another tree. And so I feel that's related, because what he's doing, he's eliminating that impulse to judge between what is self-love and what is love of neighbor. By neighbor as thyself, those two become one. So there is no judging between neighbor and self. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
They're simply manifesting love.
Yeah. No, I like that. And I think later on he's gonna bring up some points. Let me see if I can go to the table of contents, see what chapter it might be in. So I think I remember reading something like that later on in the book when I was reading this for class. Love is a matter of conscience, our duty to love those we see. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything in here title wise that would help me remember where, but I think he explores that idea when he really starts to draw the distinction more clearly between neighborly love and self-love.
Okay.
I think when he really sort of starts to flesh that out. Honestly, it might just be later in this chapter. You shall love your neighbor, and you shall love your neighbor. Like the titles of these 3 chapters. So
I know.
I think honestly, it might just come forward in this reading, like in this chapter. You shall love your neighbor. You shall love your neighbor. God, this ridiculous man.
But how does he pull so much rich insight from one word?
Oh my God. It's astonishing. It really is absolutely astonishing.
Oh, genius.
I'm going to have to go in like 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, I should be wrapping it up as well. I don't know, any other themes or passages from 2A?
No, nothing I can think of. Let me go back to the chapter. I was still in the table of contents. No, he invokes despair a lot in this chapter, and that's another thing where like despair is like the theme of the sickness unto death is despair. Like that's what despair is. It is the sickness unto death. And so I would really like to read these chapters, like what he has to say despair in this book. Well, this is probably not really relevant to what we're trying to do, but just one day I would love to like really dive deep into this book and understand despair in this, and then take that to the sickness unto death and see how much his thought had developed between writing the first book and the next one. Because I think works of love comes first. I'm not positive, but I think it comes first. I would really like to see what the concept of despair for him sort of becomes in the second of the two, whichever one it turns out to be. Because he has a lot to say about it. And here, I think it's so much more clear than it is in the sickness unto death. But I know he's invoking it all over the place. Despair consists in not having undergone the transformation of the eternal through duties you shall. Despair is not, therefore, the loss of a beloved. That is misfortune, pain, suffering. Despair is a lack of the eternal. And if the eternal is the you shall, it's the transformation of what is temporal into a duty. And, despair is to be without any sense of duty. Which seems like, I don't know, a really interesting way to sort of describe what despair is. A lack of purpose, really, a lack of telos. I don't know. I just like the way he understands despair, and I'm always sort of reading this with an eye towards it. Whenever he invokes it, like I just underline it. So I'd say
this is amazing.
Like, look out for anything you see despair come up on, and like it's something I'm really curious about. So I'm always reading for it. If you read it for it too, we can probably have some interesting ideas about it. Is there anything here that you're really interested in and don't quite understand? And I'll sort of keep my eyes open while I'm reading too.
No, in the second reading, I only got halfway through 2A, so I need to finish, that chapter before moving on to the next. But I'm glad you brought up despair. I just happened upon, this paragraph on page 54. Only when it is a duty to love, only then is love eternally and happily secured against despair. And I just get the sense, and honestly, I can really, in some ways, relate with Kierkegaard. Writing this book is almost is a practice against despair in some way. He strikes me as, something of a, introspective, kind of melancholic person.
Yeah.
Who is prone to lament the fleeting nature of the goods we experience in this life. And that sense of like the tragic temporality of life.
Yeah.
I mean, can easily lead one to despair.
Right.
And in some ways, this relating to love as a duty, as he says, it's an antidote to despair. Because one is not kind of fixing one's effort on a result. One is not loving for the sake of something else. One is loving to love. And anyway, that was just not something I had noticed in my first reading. So I'm excited to go back, through the second part of this chapter, focus on despair. Because I do really, I see that relationship. And there's a way in which he's longing for like kind of a groundedness, abiding in eternal love as a means to avoid the despair about how fleeting, love is in this world. I don't know. There's a way in which I can definitely resonate with what he's experiencing.
I wonder if there's a paradox in there where to love in order to avoid despair would somehow fail because the in order to is sort of improper.
Yes.
And if you were, yeah. I mean, is there anywhere in here there where you remember him sort of getting into that? Because it seems like intuitively almost self-evident to me that would be the case, but I don't remember him exploring that anywhere. Like if you were in despair and you were like, you know what, this is over, I'm just going to start to love, like it would somehow fail. You wouldn't have I don't know, like the sense of the sense of duty. This has to work. Like it would be something you could give up. And so when it failed to create the proper results, you'd be motivated to give up because it wasn't working. You have to do something else. Where if it's a duty, there is no giving up. This is just what you do. And so you could only overcome despair. So
I mean, for example, okay, so the bottom of page 54 and then into page 55. So he says, for this reason, there is only one assurance against despair, to undergo the transformation of the eternal through duties you shall. Everyone who has not undergone this transformation is in despair. Good fortune and prosperity can hide it. Misfortune and difficulties, on the other hand, do not make him despair as he thinks, but make manifest that he was in despair.
Oh man, so that's like a fruit thing again. Like
yes.
he always already was in despair, and
yes. So
okay.
Yeah, and if one speaks otherwise, it is because one carelessly confuses the highest concepts.
It's funny. I actually have this whole passage, like exactly that passage bracketed.
Yes, and so to me, it's I feel like my wording before wasn't as careful as it should have been. It's not necessarily a seeking shelter from despair in the eternal. It's more recognizing that one is either living in a state of despair.
Oh my God. So that honestly makes it even more sort of bleak that his nature of human, or his concept of human nature, is default by despair, despair by default, self-love by default. And to get away from those two things is an impossible task. And I think I get that impossible task thing because he cites a story about Luther. Where is this it? I have the whole thing underlined because I remember it, like, it just thought it was, I don't know, fantastic.
Where Luther did not have a single prayer without a distracting thought.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, in his whole life, not once had he ever gone through the full rosary without a distracted thought.
Right, which again, this is the paradox, like we began our discussion with.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, which is Kierkegaard is pointing to something.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we cannot inhabit that place. We're in some ways kind of bouncing between
right,
abiding in eternity and abiding in despair, right?
Oh, okay, yeah. So it's almost like Luther is attempting to abide in prayer, but never once has he ever actually fully succeeded. He has always fallen victim to distracting thoughts and had to pull himself back into prayer, back into you'd have to sort of get himself to abide in it again. Default is distracting. Prayer is where you're trying to be. Default is despair. Love is where you're trying to be.
Yes.
And like if you're not sort of aware of whether or not you're abiding in love, if you slip up for a moment, you failed in that moment. If you're not aware of the prayer you're doing, you've slipped into distracting thoughts. You failed. God, what a rough concept of human nature, man. Despair by default, selfish by default. And not even Luther could pull off a simple prayer. And what, you're supposed to pull off loving thy neighbor always, eternally, and only through duty? God, that's so much pressure. God, I like Kierkegaard, man. And I think this is why he's seen as an existentialist, even though he didn't know what that word meant. Just for him. Yeah.
He's brilliant. All right. Well, anyway, that seems like a good place to wrap up.
Yeah, I think so too, man.
When would be a good time to do this again?
Yeah, honestly, I have a rotating schedule at work, so I can't say like any one day is going to be good more than like 6 days out. So like,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, this time of the night is going to be perfect for me because one, the time difference makes it so that like when your free time is opened up, the kids are in bed. For me, it's not that late because I go to bed at, like, if we weren't talking, I'd be in bed and asleep already. It works out really well for me because like it's just the last thing I'm going to do tonight, and it works out for you. So the time thing, this is the time.
Cool.
Like, I can say that for sure, no matter what day of the week it is. About 8 o'clock for me, 10 o'clock for you.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Let's maybe give ourselves like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm going to try to reread from the start and then get through 2B.
Cool. Yeah.
Because, I don't remember chapter 1 very well. And then I reviewed 2A for the first time like 3 days ago.
Okay.
So I'm going to try and reread all of it and see how it goes.
Okay. That sounds good. Does that seem like that'd be enough for a discussion next time? Just
I think so. because I get the sense that with like every time I turn the page, light is shed on like everything that came before.
Oh, exactly.
So yeah, even if we were to read like 2 pages to agree, like 2 pages is what we're gonna read in the next month. I feel like we could literally review the entire conversation we just had off of those 2 pages, reject everything, and try again. So yeah, I think two
Yes.
will be more than sufficient.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good.
All right, sweet,
Well,
man.
this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is great.
All right, man. Take care.
Cool, man. Well, have a good night.
Yeah, you too.